our boxer.
Yeah!
Now, I have to apologize ahead of time. About a week ago, I caught a cold, and I'm getting rid of it now. I am on so many aircraft flights these days, bouncing between Northern and Southern California, that I have been catching things that my passengers, my fellow passengers have. For the young people in the audience, don't do what this lady who was old enough to know better did. She sneezed and actually cupped her nose like this and directed the sneeze directly into my left eye socket. And it was so bad I had to actually scoop it out. And I know it was psychosomatic. I know it was all in my head, but for the next day my eye socket hurt. And I just kept thinking about what was in there, and I came down with something. So I'm getting rid of it now, so I hope my voice holds out. What I'd like to do this evening, because I think we've got a little bit of time together, and you're such a great audience, is I want to spend a little bit of time setting the framework to what it is that we are facing. And by we, I mean people who think the Constitution is something that should be followed, and what it is that our opponents think and where they got this from. And I think this is very, very, very important, because this is one of the motivating rationales for why I've been running all up and down the state of California. You are something on the order of my 270th campaign event. That's 270. I'm doing it because I really think that we need to take this country back.
If you want, you can sit down there. He'll keep me busy. I won't get a chance to sit down because he knows.
I'm going to try to make this as exciting as possible, but this is a bit of a history lesson. I think this is important. What I think is the most concentrated speech in the English language was delivered in November of 1863 by Abraham Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address. 2 minutes long. The speech before that was 2 hours long. And of course, nobody remembers that speech. In that 2-minute speech, you'll see Abraham Lincoln using as the bookends of his speech the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, the purpose of this speech was to try to unify the nation and explain to the nation what was at stake. Because the Democrats at the time were doing well politically. As you may recall, they were looking at potentially running someone like McClellan, the war hero. And if they won the election in 1864, 1 year later, there would have been an armistice. And the whole, all the bloody progress of the Civil War up to that time would have just been thrown out the window. And in fact, after Lincoln's speech, papers like the Chicago Tribune, I believe it was, actually criticized it and said that Americans are probably embarrassed by the speech. So if you think the press is bad today, believe me, it was just as bad back in 1863. So the president opened his speech by saying, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Well, 407 years ago referred to 1776, right? And the concept of a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, well, that is from the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. You see, that is the mission statement of America. And I would submit to you that it should be the mission statement of any properly constituted government for all people for all time. Unfortunately, it is not. And so, in closing then, in closing the Gettysburg Address, he sets the stage and reminds people what is at stake in the conflict. That the conflict is testing the proposition whether that nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That language is evocative of the preamble of the Constitution, which begins, "We the people." Now, why do we have a Constitution? Well, if you look at what the Founding Fathers were concerned about, they studied their history. They were very practical individuals. And they knew that every republic ever created always fell. And it usually fell not from an external threat or invasion, but usually from internal tyranny. Usually. And knowing that men were imperfect, that men are not angels, and yet needing a government strong enough to restrain the individuals that are perhaps not as angelic, they set up a government with the Constitution that fully understood that people like to concentrate power. People love to have more power, and so they created a system of government with three co-equal branches. Article 1, the legislative. Article 2, the executive. Article 3, the judicial. And then they further divided power in a federal system between the federal government and the states. All designed to ensure that we could actually enjoy that mission statement, the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, which says that our rights come from where? From where? You mean rights don't come from government? Oh, I think there's a few people in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. that might disagree with that proposition. So, we have a Constitution that is designed to prevent a dangerous concentration of power so that we, the people, are more likely to enjoy our unalienable rights, correct? All right. So, now with that in mind, with that is a firm understanding of why we have a Constitution, let's now turn to the people that we find ourselves at odds with. Now, 130 years ago, they began to call themselves the progressives. Today, you might call them the progressive left, or perhaps a more negative term would just be statists. People who believe in the primacy of the state over the individual. People who think that the state is more important than any of you individuals in this audience. Now, these individuals in America got together and started to reach critical mass around the 1880s, mainly at Princeton University, where Woodrow Wilson was the president. And they were studying European philosophers like Hegel, who believed that the state, if powerful enough, could usher in social change and really bring in kind of a utopia on Earth. By the way, always beware the utopians. So, these progressives began to critique the Constitution. In fact, they said that the Constitution is obsolete, that by following the Constitution, America will be relegated to the back ranks of the nations, and that if we would only see the light and begin to discard the Constitution, we could be as good as our Western European brothers and sisters. And so they began to lay the case, saying, well, you know, the Constitution, it was written by people, some of whom owned slaves. It was written by people who didn't think women should have the right to vote. Well, let me ask you, did the Constitution not have a mechanism built into it whereby it might be amended? Yes. Amazing. They actually put into the Constitution the ability to keep it up to date, if enough people thought it was important enough to change it, right? Now, these individuals, people like Frank Goodnow and Woodrow Wilson, hypothesized that instead of three branches of government, we really needed to have two basic spheres of government, the political and the administrative. And the political would consist of your elected representatives, and what they would do is pass broad, wide-ranging legislation. It would be kind of fuzzy, but it would empower bureaucracies and administrative units composed of highly educated, highly trained, but unelected